We've been focusing on issues of being Christ-like over the past couple weeks. Holiness was part of that. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about one of our two Christ-focusing thoughts, to be more Christ-like. Here's one of two thoughts that came to my mind this year that's helpful. One is, if it pleases God, it pleases me. And we talked about contentment with that. And then we talked last week about holiness, and holiness is better than happiness. Now, I appreciate the social media engagement that we get from folks, and if you're engaged right now, that's great. And I appreciated this especially last week, as we'll see what picture was posted by our brother Hunter Swenson. Holiness is better than happiness. That's a hole in the wall. I don't know the source of the hole, but I think he took it a little literally. We had a little Twitter back and forth. This was great. Thank you for the engagement. I appreciate this. It's good to me that we would share what's going on in our lives, particularly this part of our lives. Now, the only complaint I have, Brother Hunter, is that it doesn't have a hashtag on it to tell people to find other things. So if you're posting, please do. And Kingdom Lives or First Cov Lincoln are great ways to connect with other people that way. But this made me happy. That's all I want to say about that. But I also had another conversation a couple weeks ago, a post-sermon conversation that was really just super appropriate to where we're going this morning. And that was that when we were talking about if it pleases God, it pleases me, and the idea of contentment. And sometimes in our Christian life particularly, we like to live as close to the law as possible without crossing the line. So we're not actually living to excel and be as close to Christ as we can, but sometimes we're just stepping into life in the kingdom and hanging out there at the bottom end of things. And it was a very good comment that was made, and we had a good conversation from that. And really what is being sort of accessed there is this idea of the culture we live in. We live in a legal, illegal culture. We think of things in those terms quite often. We want to sometimes live our Christian life even sometimes, or just live life in general, kind of like the rubber bands around the watermelon. If you've seen that example that people are doing these days, where you put, how many rubber bands can you put on a watermelon before it explodes by the pressure? We want to live life sometimes by putting on as many rubber bands as we can, and let's just not get to the point of explosion. Let's hit life hard and live it that way. And part of the issue that we face, in a positive sense, we live in a legal, illegal culture, but there's a lot of negatives that come with that. Because our mark of success is sometimes I just didn't break the law. And in a lot of parts of the world, and even in the world of Jesus, you certainly had your legalists, but around the world you have a lot of people who live in honor and shame cultures. And you ask a whole set of different questions. You don't ask, was it legal? Did I not break the law? You ask, was I honorable? Am I a person of integrity in that way? There's a different set of questions that come out of that. So if you take an example, like if I'm driving on the road, let's say it's a nice day, I'm driving on the road, I can obey all the traffic laws out there, including the speed limit and everything else, and still be a jerk to people around me. But I've successfully followed the law. The mark of success has been met legally. Take it to another example. I can take care of my children quite well. I can make sure they're fed and bathed and sent to school and they come home from school, but I don't have to nurture them to legally take care of them and not neglect them. Right? I've not neglected them in that case, but have I invested in them? Have I shown them love and care, that I'm proud of them? So legally I'm a success, but as far as the world of honor and shame, am I an honorable father? Am I one you would look up to and say, man, that guy has integrity in the way he treats his kids and raises his kids? You see, there's a difference in the set of questions that come up. And part of the issue is, just in life in general, we can ask the question, are we thriving or surviving? What are we doing? And we do the same thing in our faith sometimes. Am I just surviving this faith thing? Just doing enough so that I try and keep on the good side of God, or am I really thriving? Am I really moving towards who God has called me to be, what God has called me to be in this world? One way that shows itself in our faith, this legal, illegal way, is in our legal battles we've had over the past years about where to post the 10 Commandments. We make a giant deal out of this, and maybe that's good, maybe that's not, but what ends up happening is we think of the 10 Commandments as the pinnacle of faith. If you've achieved those, you've achieved a lot, and those are bedrock. Those are the bottom. Those are the do not cross the line or else parts of our faith. That's not what we're supposed to aspire to be, who we're supposed to be in Jesus Christ. That's the floor we're walking on. Through Jesus Christ, we are offered full life, real life, nothing less. We need to have a character that matches, and sometimes we're just worried about not doing bad. And we have to recognize that the absence of bad behavior is not the same as good character. Do you catch that? The absence of bad behavior is not the same as good character. Just because we don't do bad, it doesn't mean that we are good. If we have accepted life in Jesus Christ and said, Jesus is the Lord, the authority of my life, Jesus is the one who guides everything from here on out, I give my whole life to him, like we were saying this morning. I lay myself down. If we've done that, we have stepped into life in the kingdom. We've committed ourselves to the rulership of the king, and kingdom people need kingdom character to function under that rule. So we're going to look at Matthew 24. We could look at a whole ton of places. Jesus, his parables all have to do with the kingdom. We're going to look at Matthew 24 in just a moment. I'd encourage you to find it. And I want us to recognize as we get there just a couple of things. First of all, there is an end to this life we're living. Some of us recognize that more than others at certain times of life. There is an end. There will be an end to the world as we know it as well. As we live and exist now, there's something different coming. The ultimate hope that we have. And what Jesus tells us, in just a moment we'll see it, in verse 42, he says, keep watch for that moment. Keep watch because you don't know when the Lord is coming back. Basically me, when I'm coming around again, you don't know when that's going to come, but be ready for it. And as we read these words, I want to recognize who is Jesus speaking to when he says this. In a really simple sense, if you go all the way back to the beginning of chapter 24, you would see that Jesus is speaking to the disciples. But it's much more complicated than that. Jesus is speaking about anybody that claims faithfulness. Not just to the disciples who are close to him. Anybody that's claiming that they follow God in some way. Anybody that's claiming allegiance to Jesus Christ in some way. Anybody, we would translate it in our culture, anybody who says, I'm a Christian, you are claiming that you are faithful in some way, or that you're in some way. And Jesus says, Jesus is speaking to you. So I'm going to guess that that's almost all of us in the room, if not all of us. Jesus is speaking to us. And for those who are truly faithful, he's got some wonderful things and wonderful promises. For those who are claiming faithfulness but aren't, it doesn't end well. And we should hear warning. So let's go to Matthew 24, 42 through 51. And the key verse is 42. Jesus says, therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. And from here, he's going to give us 4 parables. We're only going to read 2. He'll give us 4 parables that illustrate what we should keep watch for, how we should function as we keep watch. He says, understand this. If the owner of the house had known at what time of the night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. So the homeowner is the kind of guy, if he knows that a theft is going to come, when the security guy comes to the door to sell the security system to him, he buys it. He says, I know something's going to happen. I'm going to install something to be set. Jesus goes on to the second parable. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants in his household, to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. Truly, I tell you, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time. And he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him to a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Those are 2 of the 4 parables. Jesus says, keep watch. You don't know what day it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. You have the vigilant homeowner. You'll be ready for what you expect, is one of the many things you could get out of what Jesus says there. You have the wise and the wicked servant, where integrity matters. If you claim faithful, be faithful. Don't be a hypocrite, because the end isn't good for the hypocrite. You have what comes up after this, and we'll talk about just a little bit later, is the parable of the 10 virgins. You have 5 of them who are prepared for the wedding party and 5 of them who literally run out of fuel waiting. They're all ready, they're all excited, but only 5 are ready to go. Be prepared to experience your hope. And then you have the parable of the bags of gold. You have 3 servants. They're given 3 different amounts while the master is gone. 2 of them invest and double the earnings. 1 of them buries it in the ground and earns nothing and is thrown basically where that wicked servant was thrown, out. Use what God gives you. It will multiply. You could get lots of other points from this, but this is the basics of where it goes. Jesus says, I'm coming back. The Lord will return. What are you going to do in the meantime? As you look at those different people, you have wise people and wicked people, you have prepared people, you have unprepared people. What allows them to succeed or fail in all of this? I think it has everything to do with their expectations and then the energy they put into what they expect. Expectations and energy. They either expect or don't expect the master to return, one or the other, and that tells everything about their behavior in the meantime. And in some cases, they just burn out waiting. It's happening, it takes too long, and they're not prepared for that wait. I have a tendency to need fuel in my car in the worst weather. I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off, and then it's cold like today, although it's full right now. It's cold like today, and I'll realize I'm driving home or something like that, and I think, I probably wouldn't make it very far if I don't stop for gas. So you have to stand out in negative 2-degree temperature and fill up your gas tank, and it's cold, or it's snowing. And you've got slushy cars driving all around you, or it's raining and the rain is coming at a driving angle right at the only open pump. Whatever it is, I have a tendency to pick the wrong day to need gas in the car. I have yet to run out, even though I sometimes procrastinate that task, but we all know no gas means no go. If you run out of fuel, you can't go anywhere. We need, in our own faith, we need to have something in the tank if we're going to keep moving towards our hope. Character is what we're talking about today and next week, and that's what we need to have. We need to have enough in the tank of our faith that we're going to be able to walk towards or live up to the hope that we have. That's what we need. And I would suggest to you a couple of things. What that means is we need to balance hope and holiness. If we're going to walk towards the hope, we need to have some kind of a balance between those two things, who we're called to be and where we're called to go. Last week we were talking about holiness, and we were talking about the fact that both 1 John and 1 Peter bring out that there's this transition from darkness to light. You can get a picture of holiness from that. Peter talks about it. We are called from darkness into light. That's the transition that we are going through if we're called to be holy as he is holy, which we looked at last week. As we draw closer to the light, it reflects on us what needs to change, and it also reflects to others who we are supposed to be. It's a witness. And one of the things about that is that as you draw closer to the light and discover what's unholy in you, the closer you get, the people I've discovered who are the most holy in this life are the ones who recognized how unholy they truly were. As they draw closer, they have remorse. They feel bad about sin, genuinely bad about sin. They don't take it lightly. And if we're going to balance out hope and holiness, we need what a lot of Christians through the ages have practiced or held in them, which is called compunction. It's one of my favorite words. And that really is remorse for wrong. It's a burning desire for forgiveness. It's having grief over our sin because we recognize how truly bad it is compared to how truly holy God is. And compunction keeps us moving in the right direction. On the negative side, if you will, it keeps us from sinning more. But that's only half the battle of character, as we already covered. Compunction or grief for our sin says, don't do this anymore. This grieves God as much as it grieves you, and grieves God, in fact, more than it grieves you. Compunction or grief over sin also focuses our attention on who we're supposed to be, on becoming right, on virtue, on character, and kingdom character in this particular case. We need to balance hope and holiness. There's a direction. There's something we're called to. We can even live into that hope now, but living into that hope now means moving towards the light. It means having those things reflected in us that need to change and becoming who we're supposed to be along the way. Why is it that a mother will endure the pain of labor? I mean, I've not experienced it. And even if you get an epidural, there is labor pain up until a certain point. Why is it that a mom will experience that, go through that? Because they know what's on the other side. They know it outweighs, the birth of the child outweighs the pain of the labor ultimately. Even though there's temporary discomfort and quite a lot of temporary discomfort, and it might not seem very temporary, the discomfort, they know that on the other side, it's going to be so much better. They know there's going to be so much more joy on the other side of that. And in fact, a woman who's trying to care for a child before it's born is going to, in fact, give up comfort even before that point, whether voluntarily or not in some cases, but they'll eat right. They'll probably even abstain from certain foods, and that list keeps getting longer, doesn't it? Don't eat tuna, and don't eat lunch meat, and don't eat this, and don't eat that, but they'll abstain from certain things to make sure that baby is as healthy as possible when they come into the world. That's like hope and holiness. We know what the future holds in Jesus Christ, and we'll act a certain way up until that point, because we know that what we hope for outweighs some of the discomfort and difficulty that we'll face in this life, because we follow Jesus Christ. Our expectations about Jesus' return directly impact the actions that we have while we wait for Jesus' return. And we need a character that's going to lead us towards our hope. The average tenure of an untrained youth pastor is about 1.5 years. That's a youth pastor who just probably doesn't have much experience and has never done it before. Much better for those who have experience, those who've been out in the field for a while. They usually have a long tenure if they're really called to it. But the reason is, a lot of youth pastors, and some pastors can do this too, they do everything themselves, they get no volunteers, and they use all of their ideas and they expend them in a year and a half. Done, they're gone, and they just run out of fuel. Nothing left in the tank. You can't live a full life when your tank is empty. So we need to balance hope and holiness. We also need to recognize that how we function is a witness to the hope that we have, to everyone else around us. It tells others whether the hope is worth it or not, and the character that we're going to have as a result. When you go back to those 10 virgins we heard about this morning, they're waiting for the wedding party, which would have happened at night. They knew that the wedding party would happen at night. They're supposed to be prepared with the oil and the lamps. It was special lamps and rags hanging out of it so that they could have more light, so that they could have more bigger reservoir to go where they needed to go, because the party was going to be good. The wedding, it follows the pattern of ancient Hebrew wedding, of bridegroom going to the bride's house and bringing them back and having a party after that lasts for a while. And there's a short-sighted reality, apparently, for 5 of these women. We don't know why they ran out of fuel, but let's just make something up. Imagine, if you will, that they just aren't thinking ahead. That someone just thinks, well, I've got this fuel, and somebody comes over one night, and they stay a little later, and we have to light the fuel, and then that happens a couple nights out of the week, and then they don't buy any more fuel, and they come to the wedding party, and they realize, I'm running out. Because I made all these other choices along the way that tapped me out, and now I don't have enough for the big thing I was waiting for all week. Now, I might be making that up, but quite often that's how we run out of steam, isn't it? We put our effort and energy into things that don't matter, and then when something finally matters, sometimes we miss out because we just don't have it in us anymore. They run out of steam in the parable because they just don't plan well for their hope. We sometimes do that. These statistics are a few years old, but they'll work. The average Facebook user spends 1.3 days per month on Facebook. That's if you take all the little 10 minutes here, an hour there, and put it together. 1.3 days of the month is spent on Facebook. There are 50 million tweets posted each day, and this is my favorite statistic, which I think is a much bigger number now, that if you spent 27 years without sleeping, that's how long it would take you to watch all YouTube videos posted this week. It's actually a little worse now. I calculated about 49 years without sleeping, because there's something like 300 hours posted a minute or something like that. Those are fine things. They're not bad. But we have to ask to what end when we engage in different things. In fact, I just encouraged you to use social media a little bit ago. So what am I doing? Am I just preaching something completely different now? No, I'm not. They're not bad endeavors, and I'm not against social media. We can pick all kinds of other things that consume a lot of our time. But we have to ask the question, to what end? And how does this affect our hope? If we expend all of our energy in those areas, do we have anything left for anything else in life? It's interesting. Deuteronomy 4:9, I read this morning. As the people are getting the word to go back into the land, they're being reminded of the law. They get this word: be careful, watch yourselves closely, so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. But hear that language of fade from your heart. Don't let these things that God has done, that God has taught you, fade from your heart. And I think that's sometimes what's going on inside of us. We get excited about life in Christ, about being faithful, and other things just sap that energy, just take it away from us, and we don't invest in those areas anymore, and it fades away. It affects our hope ultimately, because we invest in what we believe in. And if we believe less and less in certain things, we invest in those other things that we do believe in. We can easily, along the way, lose sight of our hope. It's easy to just lose that sight altogether. We can sometimes underestimate the impact of our decisions in life. We think we're going in an okay direction, but we make little directions or decisions that take us in ways that go off course from the hope that we could have. And we turn around after a while and we wonder, how did I get here? How did I end up over here when I thought I was going in this direction? We can easily rely only on self-power. And in any of these cases, we're going to come up empty. So we make little decisions along the way that take us away from our hope. No, I'm not going to roll out of bed this morning and go to church and worship with other people and glorify God and be edified by the word and by other people there, because life has been too busy. And we outweigh one or the other. We make a judgment, a value judgment at that. But then the problem is, then we start to lack community. We wonder why nobody's around in my life, why life seems shallow. We consistently choose to do other things rather than invest ourselves in a devotional life with God that would build our relationship with God through prayer and through Scripture. And so each day we make decisions that pull us away from that rather than towards that. And then we wonder after a while why God feels so distant or cold or uncaring. And we blame God. Sometimes we choose to watch things or do things that normalize sin. Yeah, it's just a little bit violent. Yeah, there's just a little bit of sex. Yeah, there's just a little bit of that. But then we begin to normalize it further. Yeah, there's just a little bit more than I remember. Yeah, there's a little more. And then people end up sitting, reading steamy novels, watching pornography in the rooms, and wondering, how did I get here? How did I get this far off course? Sometimes we just plain fill our tank with what won't satisfy. We play it safe. Like that fourth parable we haven't looked at, where the third servant buries the gold and doesn't invest the gold. Sometimes we don't even know how to fill the tank. We're relying on the faith of our family. Well, they were always this, so I'll be this too. But we've never taken time to really invest in that ourselves. And sometimes we rely only on tradition. It has to be this way, otherwise it's not my real faith. And sometimes we get into heated debates over those things. Sometimes we simply rely on morality, that's what Jesus gives me. Jesus gives us way more than that, by the way. Morality is just a byproduct. But that's all we have to rely on. Sometimes we just have the faith of others to rely on. Sometimes we just come and we just listen to what the pastor says, but we've never invested ourselves. And we run empty. And what does running on an empty tank say about your faith and your hope to those around you? Not only do you begin to run out of fuel, but your witness to others is that this is a faith that's not worth having. This is a Jesus that's not worth knowing. When we don't invest ourselves over and over, day in and day out, in what matters. Look again at verses 48 and 49, if you would. This is about that wicked servant. It says, suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, my master is staying away a long time, And he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. Do you think that servant wanted to be wicked when he started out as a servant? Do you think that was his goal? I mean, we don't know. We're not in his head. Let's just say he didn't. Let's just say he didn't have a character that moved him in that direction. And given the circumstances, he took advantage of that moment. And what did it do? It didn't nurture virtue in him. It brought out what was already there and nurtured that in another direction. He saw opportunity. He went the wrong way. He was furthered by his circumstances. We have to desire that we would be faithful, that we would be wise, that we would be holy, that we would be people who are pursuing being Christ-like. And that comes through small decisions. It comes through the little battles in our day. And there are two questions that we could ask about the character of our faith. The first is, since Jesus talks about watching out, what are your expectations about Jesus, and particularly Jesus' return? Do you expect that Jesus could return in your lifetime? Now, let me just point out that by even asking the question that way, for some of us in the room, we might think this guy's a little off somewhere else. This guy's a radical. This guy's something else. Because so often we've heard end time predictions, and the date of the end of the world will be X, Y, and Z. And so we ask the question even now in our culture, do you expect Jesus to return in your lifetime? And it kind of seems like a crazy question to some people. Well, yeah, I guess he might, but it's theoretical. But do we have a character? Do we have a character that really reflects that Jesus could return at any moment? The other question is, what fills up your faith? What keeps you moving towards kingdom hope in that direction? I want to point out, I studied a number of years ago the Puritans for a little while. I like the Puritans. When I say Puritans, a lot of us have a view of people wearing black suits with a buckle hat. That's this part of the world, Puritans. Incidentally, those were the radicals, by the way. Those guys were the ones who actually took the trip across the Atlantic Ocean and were questioned for doing so and had a great impact on our country. But I say Puritan, often people hear fuddy-duddy, don't they? Often people hear somebody who just wants to stop any fun. In fact, even within the Christian church, if we say puritanical, we have a negative view. Oh, you don't want to be puritanical. That's just not good. That's even the inside crowd. If you actually read the Puritans, you recognize that they were pretty well balanced. They got terrible press historically. People made up all kinds of things about them because they were living the Christian life and doing it pretty well. They were radical in some ways. You could disagree with them, but they have tremendously good things to say about raising your children and about nurturing a good family and about having a great faith and how to nurture that faith with God. Lots of good stuff overshadowed by the bad press that even happened within the church. And even now we believe those things. Yet for all the criticism, they had a strong faith. We don't want to be deceived by what holiness should be and what holiness should look like, and the decisions that we might have to make. They might even look to our fellow brothers and sisters like decisions that are ultra-holy, that are puritanical. The wicked servant was deceived when you get down to it. He was a hypocrite. He claimed faithfulness, but he didn't have it. He's the one who's going to look at the other servant and say, or the one who's doing the right thing and say, well, you're just puritanical. You're just a fuddy-duddy. You just want to end all my fun. I should be able to do these things and follow Christ as well. He had no character ultimately, but he's claiming faithfulness. And guess what? The end is not good for him. The 5 virgins were unprepared. 5 were prepared. The 5, they had an expectation of what was going to come, but they had not invested to be able to make it to the end. They didn't have the character, if you will, to get where they needed to go. Not only did it end then where they missed out on the fun and the party to come, they were a very poor witness to those around them. We have to take Jesus seriously now. We have to take Jesus' return seriously now. We have to develop kingdom character in those small decisions in life that may seem like we're off our rocker to some people. Holier than thou, ultra out there, radical. to live in the fullness that Jesus Christ promises now. You see, one of the issues for that wicked servant, he wanted to enjoy life now, and he thought it was a choice between now or later. In Jesus Christ, we have the opportunity to enjoy life now and later. We just have to recognize what that life is now. Fill it with the right things and make sure we don't run out of fuel before the end. Have an expectation of hope that meets the reality right now. Let's pray. God, give us kingdom character, and where we feel like we're lacking, we ask that your Spirit would come into our lives and convict us. Give us that sense of compunction, that grief over sin in areas where we don't meet up, not so that we would beat ourselves up, but so that we would draw closer to you. Not so that we would feel pulled away and distant from you, so that we'd feel you're cold, but so that we'd recognize your mercy and your grace. That those are handed out to us freely and often, and it's really just up to us to take those. That as we draw towards your light, we can become like your Son, Jesus Christ, and we can be a witness to those around us. Those who are fumbling through life, trying to find real meaning, trying to find their identity. God, it's all found in you. Help us find that. Help us lead others to that. God, if there are any in the room who don't know your Son, Jesus Christ, God, speak to them now. And my challenge is if you need a change, if it's coming to Jesus, literally, or if it is changes in your life and direction, take time right now to confess. Take time to invite the Spirit in. Take time to invite Jesus in right now. God, your hope is not hype. It's worth having. Give us that hope. And help us be holy as we live into that hope. Help us draw into your light. Never to call it darkness. Never to laugh at what you offer us. But God, to flee from sin and to run to you. Pray this in your name.